Chapter 12, leases, landlords, and tenants. We went over quite a few chapters that talked about types of ownership and when there's more than one, all that stuff, types of estates and land. In this chapter, we're going to go over another type of estate and land that deals with the leasehold estates. We're going to go over lease contracts and all kinds of other things that have to deal with renting. All right, so let's get started. Chapter 12, leases, landlords, and tenants. In this chapter, we're going to explain the characteristics of the four types of leasehold estates, describe standard lease provisions, including various forms of eviction. We're going to learn what eviction is, and the effects of the Truth in Renting Act, as well as the Americans with Disabilities Act. We're going to discuss differences between various types of leases and identify what the primary functions of a property manager are. Okay, so what is a lease? Good question. What is a lease? Well, a lease is an intangible or incorporeal asset that is considered to be personal property. You could touch the paper a lease is printed on, but you can't touch what it symbolizes. What does a lease symbolize? The rights that are given to the tenant. So the owner is the lessor, and they intentionally transfer most of their rights, like the right of possession of the premises, to the tenant, who is the lessee. Remember, words that end in OR is the one that's giving whatever the root word is, the root word being lease. So who's giving the lease? The landlord, the lessor. And who's receiving the lease? The tenant, the lessee. Easy way to identify the players there. So for a limited time, a specified period of time is defined in the lease. So the owner intentionally transfers most of their rights, like the right of possession, to the tenant, who is the lessee, for a limited period of time, a specific period of time as defined in the lease. That shouldn't be its own bullet point, though. So let me remove that. The lease also sets forth um, the length of the contract, the amount to be paid for the right to occupy and use someone else's property during that term. And it also defines the rights and obligations of both of the parties. Demise. Every lease has a demising clause in it. Do not confuse the word demise with devise, which we already learned. Devise is a transfer of property by will upon death. Demise, which sounds like death, is not. Demise is a transfer of property by lease. So every lease has a demising clause in it that says the landlord is to let the premises and the tenant is to take possession of it. So every lease has a demising clause describing what the landlord is exactly renting to the tenant. They may say, well, the garage, you can't use the garage because I got my car and tools in there. You can't use the attic, and you got access to half the basement. If they don't specify what it is that the tenant can use or cannot use, they are renting and have access to the entire premises. Okay, you have to specify any limitations to that in the lease. So every lease has a demising clause describing what the landlord is renting and that the tenant is taking possession. So because of that, a lease is both a contract as well as a conveyance. Even though they're only conveying the property for a limited period of time, and the contract lays out all the terms and fees and all the details. So let's highlight that. A lease from an owner of real estate known as the lessor, and the tenant is the lessee, and it's for a specific period of time. Transfer of property by lease is known as demise. And that the New Jersey Statute of Frauds requires that leases for a period of more than 3 years must be in writing, and it can be recorded if it's more than 2. And remember, when real estate agents are involved, we always need to get any contracts in writing. Sales contracts always are required to be in writing. Leases, they don't need to be, unless it's 3 or more years, or there's a real estate agent, a licensee involved. We're not entitled to a commission unless we put our contracts in writing. So remember this slide again. The statute of frauds says that contracts for sale always need to be in writing, and leases must be in writing if they're 3 or more years. Unless a real estate licensee is involved, then it doesn't matter the length, the term of the lease. And they can be recorded in the public record if they're 2 or more years. You need to know this for exams. There will be an exam question on this once again. Estates and land. If you remember this from the day that I was not here, you were taught about estates and land. An estate and land, it describes the amount and kind of interest that someone has in real property. Okay. And there's 2 categories of estates. We have freehold estates, which you went over back in chapter 6. The 3 types of freehold estates. And then there's, in this chapter, we're going to go over the 4 types of less than freehold estates, which are leasehold estates. Freehold is the category that describes ownership. Dare I ask if anybody remembers what the 3 types of freehold estates are? I could start you out. The first one goes by 3 names: fee, fee simple, or fee simple absolute. That is ownership, unrestricted ownership forever. The second type of estate is, what do we call the estates based on a restriction? It's ownership forever as well, but it's based on a restriction. We need to study. Fee determinable, defeasible, or conditional fee. It goes by 3 names as well, because they're based on, the ownership's based on a condition. And then the last type of ownership estate, life estate. You guys remember that? What do you call a life estate based on someone else's life, other than the person that it's given to? It's a Latin term. Sounds French, but it's Latin. Por otra vie. A life estate, por otra vie, means for the life of another. If we don't recall these things, you guys should really start reviewing your notes. So leasehold estates, there's 4 types of them. We have this is the category of non-ownership. It's where an owner intentionally transfers some of their rights and interest in real estate that they own to a tenant for a limited period of time as defined in a lease. So a lease is considered personal property that's an intangible or incorporeal assets, because the lease symbolizes your rights to occupy someone else's property, and you can't touch your rights. Do you value your rights? I know when I watch cops, I see people getting pulled over all the time. They're like, I know my rights. But do you value them? Do you really know them? Well, you can't touch a right. And I hope you value your rights, but they are an intangible asset. You can't touch them. Okay, so the 4 types of estates and land, the leasehold estates that we're going to go over right now in the category of less than freehold, the leasehold estates, are estate for years, a periodic estate, also known as period to period, estate or tenancy at will, and an estate or tenancy at sufferance. Now, I got this a little bit different order than what we got here in the book. We're skipping ahead for some things because I think they're important to know now before we start getting into the lesson. So I put them in this order here on this slide. You know, rent is due at specific intervals per your lease. If not specifically stated in your lease when the rent is due, most people think it's due on the 1st. That's because most landlords put it in the lease that it's due on the 1st of the month. According to New Jersey law, it's due in the arrears. Where is your rear? What's it also called? Your behind, right? So it's at the end of a term, your rear end, right? At the end of a term. So according to New Jersey law, unless a landlord specifies that rent is due on a specific date at the beginning of the term, it's actually due at the end of the month after you've occupied the premises for the entire month. Now, anyone who terminates a lease early is in breach of contract, without a doubt. A holdover tenant is a tenant who did not vacate the premises after their lease term rights have expired. They've held over. They did not leave. Is that a negative thing? Is that bad? Not necessarily. The landlord could accept the holdover tenancy and they could still be paying their rent. But a landlord can either accept that holdover tenancy or they could choose to evict a tenant who does not sign a new lease. They may not want a tenant there who's not signing their lease contract. What is eviction? Eviction is actually a legal process. I actually got a pretty good definition that I wrote here as an explanation that you will not find in this book, okay? Eviction is the legal process of removing a tenant through the court system. Can I take away your rights? No. You have rights, you value your rights, nobody can take your rights from you. However, when you're a tenant, tenants are given rights in the lease. The landlord cannot take those rights away from you unless you violated the agreement that created those rights for you. And then you'd have to take you to court to do that. And then a judge would determine whether you violated the terms of the lease, which granted you those rights, and therefore they do away with any rights that lease document had created, therefore revoking your rights. That's the only time where somebody's rights can be taken from them, was when they were taken when they were given to them to begin with based on an agreement and you violated the agreement. Okay? That's how you put it in simple terms. So let's see, what did I write here? An eviction is the legal process of removing a tenant through the court system. A landlord cannot lock out a tenant or turn off services or physically remove them. The tenant has rights, and eviction is the process of revoking those rights because the tenant violated the terms they agreed to in the lease, which granted those rights, or the lease expired, granting those rights. Okay? So that's why the landlord can't just grab you, pull you out by your hair, drag you out, and throw you in the street. They can't change the locks. They can't turn off your heat or hot water or services if they're included in the rent. Because tenant got rights, even if they're not paying their rent to get you out. They need the court to revoke those rights. All right, there's 4 types of leasehold estates. Let's write the number 4 in front of that, and let's highlight leasehold estates. Estate for years, periodic estate, tenancy at will, and tenancy at sufferance on page 228. All right. So what is an estate for years? It's a lease for a definite period of time. It's for a fixed term that has an end date in it. Periodic estate, known as period to period, is a lease with a stated term. That term automatically renews. It renews for the same amount of time the original lease was written for. So instead of having an expiration date in the agreement, it actually has a renewal date. So it does have a date in the agreement, but that date is not an expiration date when you got to get out. It's a renewal date that will automatically renew unless you let the landlord know that you don't want to renew, that you want to terminate the agreement, that you're going to move out. So this lease would automatically renew for the same amount of time the original lease was written for. And if you want to terminate this type of leasehold estate, you have to give advance notice. Now, how much notice is needed to be given will depend on the term of the lease, which we'll get to the details of each one of these on the coming slides. Okay, I just want to just go down the basics of these things right now. And then we have an estate or tenancy at will. Estate at will or tenancy at will. It's for an indefinite period of time. It's undefined. That's what indefinite means. It's undefined period of time. You could stay there at will, as long as you want to stay, and as long as the landlord allows it. And then we have the tenancy at sufferance. This is without the landlord's consent. All right, so let's get into the details because these were kind of just teasers about the 4 types of leasehold estates. But before we do, let's highlight these distinguishing characteristics of these 4 leasehold estates. So on page 228, you see this, leasehold estates. Highlight distinguishing characteristics and then right there of a leasehold estate. The estate for years is for a definite period of time. It's for a fixed term with an end date. You should write that there next to that. For a fixed term with an end date. You know when it starts, you know when it ends. That's a fixed term. Periodic estate automatically renews. So we're going to write next to that, has a renewal date in it. And I want you to specifically relate the word indefinite with the estate at will. So an estate at will is for an indefinite period of time. So in the book, when we get to going over a periodic estate, they're also going to have in the definition, the explanation, the word indefinite. I'm going to want you to cross it out when we get to it. Because I don't want you to associate the word indefinite with an estate, a periodic estate, because then it'll get you all jacked up on the exam. And then an estate at sufferance is without the landlord's consent. So everybody have these things highlighted, or you're still writing these notes? Everybody good? Excellent. So let's start off. We'll get into the depths of each one. An estate for years. Do not let the name fool you. Does not need to be for a period of years. It doesn't even need to be for a year. It could be for a week, a month, 3 months. The key characteristic is it's for a fixed term. You know when it begins, you know when it ends. It does not need to be for a length of years. So, estate for years is for a fixed term with an end date in it. It'd be week, 3 weeks, 3 months, a year, 2 years. Specific defined period of time with an end date. No notice to quit is required to terminate at the end of this lease. Why? Because it already has an expiration date in it. If you didn't renew, you got to go. All right. So that's why the landlord doesn't give you any further notice. If you didn't specifically renew the lease with them, then you got to go at the end of the term. The expiration date, that's when you got to go by. Okay, renew or go. So let's do these highlights that talk about this same stuff. Everybody got that down? Everybody got those highlights? Or anybody need to do it still?
I got it.
Everybody got it. Okay. Uh, this thing didn't switch it. Periodic estate, from period to period. It's also known as this is the lease with a renewal date in it rather than an expiration date. These leases will automatically renew for the same amount of time the original lease was written for. Either party gives notice to quit. That means to terminate the lease before it renews. Now, there is a time period, there's a certain amount of time that that notice needs to be given in advance so that the lease does not automatically renew. If the lease is for a period from week to week, 1 week's notice is required. Month to month, 1 month's notice. Period of years, 3 months' notice is required. Advance notice that you're not going to renew the lease. This way it gives the landlord, like your typical lease is a year, right? So you got a 1 year lease. The landlord will send you out a renewal notice, usually for that lease. And if you don't sign it, this is with an estate for years, they'll send you out a renewal notice, usually 3 months in advance. And then the tenant has 2 months to get back to them. So that then the landlord has another month. If you're going to be moving out, they're going to have a month to search for a new tenant. So they'll have one lined up to move in when you move out. Now, with a periodic estate, they don't need to send you that renewal. It's automatically going to renew. Unless you notify the landlord, you're not going to renew it. So when a tenant gives notice to quit, but then does not vacate, they can be held liable for double the rent for each month they've held over. By the way, I haven't uploaded your playlist yet of all your classes recordings that I have. I'll try to get that done and get that to you tomorrow so I can give you that playlist so that you guys can rewatch the videos and all that stuff. Except for the one day that we were missed and I was absent, I'll just grab one of the pre-recorded classes I have from another class for those 2 chapters and then put that in there so you still got it in the playlist there. Okay. All right. So let's do these highlights for periodic estate. And I want you to cross out the word indefinite. It makes sense in a sentence there, why it's there, but I just don't want you to associate the word indefinite with a periodic estate because it'll get you all screwed up when it comes to answering questions on exams that may ask you, which one of these estates is for an indefinite period of time? Technically, it's not the periodic estate. Periodic estates are for a specific period of time. It's just that they keep renewing. So technically that indefinite length of time is incorrect. So let's cross out the word indefinite. It's you're entered into an agreement that continues for a length of time without a specific expiration date because it keeps renewing. It has a renewal date. Okay. So if you notify your landlord though that you're going to terminate the lease, but then you don't move out and you hold over, you could be held liable for double the rent that you stay there because the landlord may have already lined up another tenant to move in, but you're occupying it now. The landlord's violating the lease for the new tenant, so they're going to have to put them up somewhere in the meantime. So they could try to make up some of that expenses by charging you because you didn't get out when you were supposed to, and you said you were. Okay, so the term holdover tenancy you need to know as well. All right, estate or tenancy at will. At will. Something I want. I will it, right? So it's an estate for an indefinite period. I want you to associate the word indefinite with at will because no length of time is specified in this lease. Either party must give 3 months' notice to terminate such lease. It's terminated automatically if either party dies, just like most leases. I don't know why they specifically say that for this one. Both parties must agree to terminate to that indefinite term with the 3-month notice to quit when entering into this agreement. And it is often used by landlords who were notified, often used by a landlord who was notified by the state that they will be taking their property by eminent domain and doesn't know how they can lease it out for. But in the meantime, the landlord still got to pay the taxes. They still got to pay a mortgage. So they enter into an agreement so that they can rent to somebody, but I don't know how long they can rent to you for. So it'll have to be at my will. When the state notifies me that they're going to be taking my property and they give me an actual date that that's going to happen by, I'm going to let you know that you have 3 months to get out. Are you good with that? That's basically what a tenancy at will does. Okay. That's why they don't specify a term in the lease. The term is when you got to go. I'll give you a 3 months notice. Cool with that? Then we're good to go. So that's basically what a tenancy at will is. You're there at the landlord's will. And this is when it's often used in cases where the landlord's been notified that their property is being taken by eminent domain by the government or a quasi-governmental agency or what have you. And but they may not tell them when exactly. It may be a couple of years from now. It could be a couple of months. But they'll always give the landlord a heads up enough time so that they can deliver it vacant. So they'll have to notify the tenant, give them 3 months notice. Everybody get the notes? And lastly, we have a tenancy at sufferance or an estate at sufferance. This is when a tenant once had a valid lease. That lease had expired. The tenant did not renew their lease. They also didn't move it. And they're not paying. So every month they stay there, they're causing the landlord to suffer. Thus, the tenancy at sufferance. Make sense? So a holdover tenant not paying rent can be evicted at any time for non-payment of rent. This is the only reason that a landlord can evict a tenant without giving them a notice to quit first by serving them papers to stop whatever lease breaking, violating activity the tenant is doing. The only reason is for non-payment of rent. They don't need to give any notice to a tenant. You know you got to pay your rent. If you're not paying your rent, they could immediately go file paperwork with the court to schedule a eviction date, a court date to get you out. This is not squatters' rights, which could create an easement by prescription. This tenant was once a lawful, valid tenant who had a valid lease. Now, just as fee simple absolute is the highest estate in land, it's unrestricted ownership forever. Tenancy at sufferance is the lowest estate in land. You're a tenant. Your rights have expired. You didn't renew the lease. You didn't move out, and you're not paying rent. Okay, you have the least rights of anybody. But the landlord still needs, you still have rights though. The landlord still needs to take you to court to evict you to get you. So the landlord can't pull you out by your hair. They can't change your locks. They can't throw all your crap out by the curb. You know, they have to revoke your rights to get you evicted. They do that through the court, through a process known as eviction. So the tenant's rights expired, didn't move out, they're not paying rent. For every month they remain, they're causing the landlord to suffer. That's why they call it a tenancy at sufferance. Okay? So you can highlight this definition for tenancy at sufferance in the book, but they left out that little detail. To be a tenancy at sufferance, you also have to not be paying rent. So make sure you're right. Also not paying rent up there. Everybody good?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, so a little recap. Demise is a transfer of property by lease. A leasehold estate is a tenant's right to occupy someone else's land and are considered personal property, which is an intangible asset. A holdover tenant is a tenant whose rights to occupy real estate expired, but they didn't vacate at the end of the lease term. And the four types of leasehold estates are estate for years, which are for a specific period of time, has a definite start date and end date. You know when it ends. So the landlord doesn't need to provide any further notice to quit. You have to be out by the expiration if you did not renew the lease. Periodic estate is from period to period. There's no specific termination date, but it does have a date that's a renewal date. The lease term automatically renews for the same amount of time. Month to month, every 3 months, 6 months, every year, 2 years, 3 years. It'll renew for the same amount of time it was originally written for. And the tenant must give the landlord a notice to quit. If it's for a period of week to week, 1 week's notice must be given. Month to month, 1 month's notice, or for a period of years, 3 months' notice. Tenancy at will is for an indefinite period of time. There's no length specified in the lease. Both parties just need to agree to this undefined, indefinite period of time with the agreement that the landlord will give the tenant 3 months' notice that they got to go. And then a tenancy at sufferance is when somebody had a valid lease, their lease term expired, they did not renew it, they're not paying rent, and they did not move out. Every month they remain, they cause the landlord to suffer. So therefore, a tenant at sufferance can be evicted at any time without any notice. So here's some of the standard provisions that are added to leases. We went over standard provisions for valid contracts, valid leases. It's kind of similar. You got to have parties that have capacity to the contract. They're sane legal adults, right? You You have to have a demising clause that says the landlord is to let the premises and the tenant is to take possession. There has to be a description of the premises, what exactly is being rented and what is being excluded from the tenant's use. The term must be clearly stated, the duration or at will. And how and when the rent will be paid must be specified, because if you don't, when is the rent due? In the arrears, at the end of the month, at the end of the term, the opposite of in advance. Leases must be in writing for a term of more than 3 years. They can be recorded if more than 2. Doesn't matter the length of the term of the lease, though. When a real estate agent's involved, for to be entitled to a commission, doesn't matter the length of the lease. It needs to be in writing. And it needs signatures. Both parties need to sign. Okay, window guards. You guys know what window guards are? Window guards prevent the windows from opening more than 4.5 inches so that a child can fall out. So there is no paragraph in this book that talks about it, except other than in the lease itself. So on page 235, section 36, put a highlighted box around that entire section that explains what window guards are. I will have a next slide where I have an explanation with some details, which you may want to snap a picture of other than reading this thing, which is in all capital letters and bold. So let me know when you found it and you highlighted it so that we can move on to the next slide.
I got it.
Everybody found it? Everybody got it?
Got it.
All right, so here's a slide for window guards. I suggest you snap a picture of this one for your study notes. The part that's in the box is what you specifically need to know for exams. The rest of it, you may want to know that just for practice in the business. So, window guards. They prevent that window from opening wide enough that a child can fall out, specifically 4.5 inches. It applies to buildings with 2 or less rental units. Window guards must be installed by the landlord. They must be installed by the landlord. If a child 10 years of age or younger will be living there or regularly present. If the tenant gives the landlord a written request to install window guards. Homeowners associations are responsible for installing window guards in the common areas like the hallways and such. It's only required on first floor. Window guards are only required on first floor units if the windowsill, it's the bottom of the windowsill is at least 6 feet above grade, 6 feet above the ground. Why? Because if the children fall 6 feet, they can hurt themselves. Now, those higher up windows, they may usually have fire escapes or things like those. We really don't want to put window guards on those because then they won't be able to get out and they'd be trapped in the event of a fire. But we'll dive into that just a little bit more in just a second. I'm giving you some additional information here that they're not going to ask you questions on an exam or expect you to know. But buildings with 3 or more units, not counting the unit the landlord's living in, landlords must install window guards unless the tenant directs them specifically not to install those window guards in writing. See, the landlord's required to do it by law in buildings with 3 or more units. They have to install them unless the tenants notify in writing that they do not want them. And then the landlord, every year before February 15th, must have the tenant fill out a form that they don't want those window guards. They got to ask them every year. Installed window guards have to be inspected by the landlord twice a year, once between March 1st and May 1st, and again between September 1st and December 1st. And they need to keep a log of their inspection results to make sure nobody's been tampering with them, it's not loose, and it's well maintained. So window AC units installed must use tamper-resistant one-way screws to bolt that air conditioner in, and not have any spaces greater than 4.5 inches that a child can slither through. Landlords can pass along the cost of the window guards of up to $20 to each of the for each of the window guards. If you guys want to snap a picture, once again, here's your opportunity to snap a picture before I change the slide. You can see this is not mentioned in the book. Okay. Here's what window guards look like. Here's a picture from the outside. Here's a picture for the types of windows that swing outwards. It's like an L bracket. And here's what these window guards look like from the inside. So they got to use these L-shaped stoppers that are screwed in with one-way screws to prevent the windows from opening beyond the window guard if they could open any further. Some windows have built-in plastic tabs that you could pull out that snap into place so that wouldn't allow you to open it any further too. So that's what a window guard looks like. Just want to give you a little visual, a little understanding. Some of the typical provisions of a lease have to have the start date and end date, the term of that lease, or if it's at will. The use of the premises needs to be specified if it's not going to be the entire premises that the tenant's going to have access to. Agency relationships need to be disclosed, just like in a sales contract. There has to be an acknowledgement that you've given the tenant the CIS form and the landlord. It's only not required on residential leases less than 125 days. We need to have the Opinion 26 notice as the cover page of the lease that we prepare. Remember, Opinion 26 needs to be the cover page of any contract prepared by licensees. What kind of contracts can licensees prepare? Sales contracts and lease contracts for 1 to 4 families and single residential buildable lots. Because anything else is considered commercial, and those need to be prepared by attorneys. If the property was built prior to 1978, we need to get that federal lead paint disclosure statement that's first filled out by the owner, signed by the tenant as well. We need to provide the tenant with a copy of the pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead, and give them a 10-day opportunity to conduct a lead inspection or waive that inspection if they want to close any sooner on that lease. New Jersey also has that requirement now that properties be inspected too. The federal law does not require inspection. New Jersey law now does, as of last year. The New Jersey lead safe law requires inspection in rental units. And here are some sources to that information. You got to check with your town. Some different towns set up that you got to register it online. You could arrange for the inspections and how they go about it. Or you could click on these links to get the resources to get your property certified lead free. Security deposits. What are security deposits? It's a guarantee that rent will be paid by the tenant. So it's money they give you in advance that you hold in a bank account held only for security deposits. It only holds security deposits to guarantee that the rent is going to be paid and to cover any damages that the tenant may do. This money must be placed in a special interest-bearing bank account used only for security deposits. The tenant must be notified where that money is being held, and the tenant must be paid the interest earned from that bank account on their money. It needs to be given to the tenant as a credit on the anniversary of their lease, or give it back to them as a check. The penalty, if the landlord does not do this, if the tenant knows their rights, which is very strange that a lot of tenants actually do not know about this law, that the landlord can be double the entire security deposit that they're holding if the landlord does not pay them their interest in the lease. Oh, isn't that interesting? Anybody ever hear that one before? How many people hear of renters? Anybody hear of renter? No hands. Okay. Well, if you were a renter, there you go. You got to put down that security deposit. And if the landlord doesn't pay you the interest earned from your security deposit in that bank account, you could take the landlord to that same landlord-tenant court where they would take you to evict you, and you could compel that landlord to pay you double the entire security deposit because they're stealing from you. That's why they've got this law in place. Now, many landlords I've had in these classes, they're aware of this law too. This is why everybody should read the Truth in Renting booklet that's a renter or a landlord. The maximum security deposit allowed for residential is 1.5 times the monthly rent. There is no maximum security limits for commercial real estate. The landlord can charge as much as they can get away with getting a tenant agreeing to pay. It is not uncommon for commercial tenants to pay 3 months security deposit. It's probably even the average. Pet security can be charged as long as the total security deposits don't exceed the 1.5 times monthly rental figure. The pet security is still security. And you probably should not charge that or call it pet security if the person has a service animal, because you can't charge any additional fees for a service animal. You could charge security still, though. Just don't call it pet security because technically they're not a pet. So service animals cannot be charged additional fees, rent or security, because they're not pets. So it's advised not to call it pet security. Just call it security. It must be returned with security must be returned to within 30 days of the lease termination if there is no damages. The penalty for violating this rule, once again, double the entire security deposit that the landlord was holding. Deduction for damages have to be on an itemized report. The landlord can't be like, your security deposit because you screwed up my place. What specifically? Well, they have to break down an itemized report. There is a hole here. We're charging you this much to repair it. There was this garbage left in this room. We're charging you this much for the cleanup and removal and disposal of it. They have to give you an itemized list with the costs, which should be reasonable. And then give you back any money that's left over. Landlord can't just be like, I'm keeping your security deposit because you screwed up my place. Although, in most instances, when tenants screw up a place where the landlord needs to hold your security deposit, I have found it's because they destroyed the place, and that security deposit wasn't enough to cover all the damages. Sometimes tenants can be, uh, they could be bad. I, I had this one, where I was getting a listing from a property owner and previously was renting this apartment. And I walk into it and I was like, it stunk. I had to open every window in that apartment. I was like, what the F is that stank ass smell in here? And he's like, I can't figure out where it's coming from. I'm like, I got a good nose, so I'm like trying to sniff out where it's coming from like a dog. I grab a chair because in the bedroom, in the closet, you know how they got that shelf up top in the closet? If you climb on top of the chair, you could see back in the corner the tenant hammered a hole in the wall out of sight if you're standing on the ground. You got to climb a ladder or a chair and look on there. He hammered out a hole. He put a dead fish in it. And the dead fish were just rotting behind the wall, stinking up the apartment. That was deliberately done. So the landlord, I advised him to try to track down that tenant and sue him for additional damages that he's caused. By the way, odors are damages, you know. So damages, could be holes in the wall. They could be stuff like this where a tenant does malicious things like this. It could be where your dog pees on the carpet or rips up the floor, and bites the edges of the door. Those are damages. Cooking, people who cook with a lot of spices, that smell up the place. They get in there that you need to paint the apartment. That could be damages. Same thing with smoking, smokers, the smell from the smoking, or pets. To try to deodorize these things to neutral again, so that the average person doesn't smell these things any longer, is considered damages that could require repairs just for simple cleanup because the odors are embedded in the walls pretty much. Okay, now, if the property is sold, the landlord must turn over the security deposits to the new owner and notify that tenant where the security is being held now because you changed landlords. But the new landlord has to honor the lease. They can't go requiring you to sign a new lease that's different than the previous one you had. It's just that they're the landlord now and they're holding a security deposit in a different place. But they can't require you to sign a new lease with different terms than you already had with different rental amounts. They can't do that. All right, let's do some highlights here now in the notes on page 239, security deposits.
I got it.
Everybody got it? Excellent. Late payments. They can be charged to tenants, but you better check your local rent control laws to see if your town has them. Not all municipalities have rent control, but those that do, you need to follow the laws which can restrict how much and even if you could charge late fees and when. Some tenants are required by law that a landlord cannot charge them any late fees or penalties for at least 5 days. And that is if they're receiving Social Security benefits, old age retirement pensions, or basically any government or quasi-governmental pension or payment. Because if you're relying on the payment coming from the government and the government is late in getting it to you, the landlord can't penalize the tenant because the government sent you your payment late. Okay? So that's why they got to be given a 5-day grace period free from any late fees or penalties. See, a lot of landlords, they know about this, that they need to give certain tenants 5 days grace period, but they're not sure why or to specifically to who. And this is now you have that knowledge now. So not all tenants need to be given that grace period, but I usually do, and I usually suggest that whether I'm doing property management or or I have a landlord that they're doing it themselves. I usually tell them, rent is due. We prepared the lease. Rent is due on the 1st of the month. By the 5th of the month, you got a 5-day grace period. But if they don't pay by the 10th of the month, don't matter who you are, you're being charged late fees and penalties, and now can possibly be accruing legal costs if the landlord has to go file for eviction papers. So then we give them a couple more days, and if they don't pay by then I tell the landlord, go to the courthouse and start filing the papers for the eviction. The courthouse will have to set a date or whatever. It'll probably be at least a week before they get that out in the mail out to the tenants. But now, whatever court fee you have to pay to start that eviction, you could pass that on to the tenants if they get caught up in the rent because they were late in paying the rent. See, a lot of landlords, they don't treat it like a business. A lot of landlords, what they'll do is they'll just be like, oh, well, the tenant told me, they're having a little tough time right now, and blah, blah, blah. It's all about the emotions. Whatever sob story fill in here, which it could be real, it could be an issue, but break it down to it as pertaining to the landlord. It's a sob story. How is that their problem? You're trying to make your problems their problems, and it's really not their problem. So they still need to pay their taxes. They still need to pay their mortgage on time. They still need to pay their homeowner's insurance and all that stuff. So it's not the landlord's issue. That's your issue. You're trying to make it their issue. And if the landlord listens to these problems and gives you a little more time because they're a big old softy, they end up getting hurt by this. I got a brother. He's got a rental property. He's got a 2-family house that he lives in. The other one, he got a tenant in. I found out that his tenant was 2 years behind on the rent. I was like, what are you doing? Like, well, she's a single mom, and she had a fight with her boyfriend. The boyfriend, moved out. I was like, well, was he on the lease to begin with? No, but he moved in there, but he was helping out with stuff. I'm like, so it's like compounding sob stories, one after the other. It's like, it's not your problem. Plus, isn't she collecting Section 8? Shouldn't that be deposited directly into your account? Well, yeah, because she gets partial subsidized, so some money comes from Section 8 and the other she's supposed to pay, but she hasn't paid it in 2 years. I'm like, dude, you're charging her half of what the market rental rates are already. She's getting a bargain and she's not paying you. Kick her the hell out. It's not your problem. Don't let her make it your problem. They know how to game the system. They know how to play landlords that do this repeatedly. I've seen this happen time, especially if it's a single girl and she's got a baby. Oh my God. I've seen them rake landlords over the coals. They, oh, a baby, and we can't go out on the street. We got nowhere to go and all this. And then when they eventually get evicted, all of a sudden their attitude and they're like, oh, they're all like that. I took advantage of you, and then go into another landlord and do the same shit. It's people know how to play the system. So don't get taken in by other people's problems. It's not your problem. You got your problems. I got my problems. If you're going to be a landlord, treat it like a business. If you're going to be a softie, don't be a landlord or hire a property management company to handle this for you. Guys, I've seen people lose their houses. I've seen people lose their houses because of their tenants. You got to treat it like a business. Rent is due on the 1st of the month. 5th of the month, we get a leeway. Fees or penalties. After the 5th of the month, we start incurring late fees and charges. You will start incurring legal fees and charges if it's not paid by the 10th. And then it's not paid by the 10th. Landlord, go start filing the eviction papers with the court. Once that tenant gets that notification to appear in court for the landlord tenant court because they're late on the rent, oh my God, I got to get that payment in. All of a sudden, now the landlord becomes the priority. So if they wait and wait and wait, especially if it's got like a single mother with a child, courts will give them leeway, give them more time, and it could take up to 6 months to get them out. So if a landlord was already giving them leeway, and then the court gives them leeway, the landlord could find them really delinquent in their mortgage payments and maybe their taxes and all that. It could end up costing them a lot. So anyway, my 2 cents, a little education there too. Okay, so let's see. Always check any local rent control laws before you charge any late fees or penalties, because they could restrict you from doing that or how much you could charge. So let's highlight that. Landlords may charge late fees except to senior citizens receiving Social Security, old age railroad retirement pensions, or other government pensions. They got to be given that 5-day grace period free from any late fees or penalties. All right, possession of leased premises. Tenants cannot take possession until the date specified on the lease. This is directed to you as the real estate licensee. You better not give a tenant access, giving them the keys early before that start date on the lease, before they actually paid the landlord, before the start date on the lease, or before the city did their inspections. If you give access to a tenant who may try to play on your heartstrings, oh, I just got a couple of things. Can I just put like a suitcase or two in there? I just got to put a couple of things. I got no place to store it. Can I just put a couple of things in there before the lease starts? Do not do that. Because the second that any of their belongings go in there, they've taken possession legally. And now the landlord would have to evict them to get them out and go through the court process. And if they didn't even pay anything yet, sounds like a scammer. You're going to have some issues. And you can lose your license. And you could definitely get fined for this. So licensees should never give a tenant the keys, even to only store a few belongings there before the lease term begins. You'd be risking your license by doing so. We already went over this thing in an earlier chapter 4 about the landlord's worker using their pass key to get into the tenant's apartment, and then he was doing obscene things in the fiance's underwear. Well, we already discussed this. So the landlord or their agents, the workers, cannot enter any apartments without the tenant's specific permission, except in the case of emergencies, like gas leaks or flooding, things of that nature. Otherwise, it's breaking an entry. And you can file that complaint for defiant trespass under this code. And you can get that information from the Truth in Renting booklet. Remember, there's a lot of issues that are discussed in the Truth in Renting booklet. Can a tenant put up a satellite dish in their apartment, for their apartment, because they want satellite service instead of cable TV service? Do you know? Issues about pets or service animals or any other issues like that, you'd have to discuss in the Truth in Renting booklet. You'd have to look it over. There's a lot of resources there too for people who maybe lost their job or they're low income. They need assistance in paying their utilities. And so there's all kinds of programs out there for this stuff. Truth in Renting booklet has resources there for you. All right, improvements. Can a tenant make improvements to their apartment that they're renting? Anybody? Anybody? Bueller? A tenant is strictly forbidden from making any improvements without getting the landlord's permission first. You can't even paint your apartment without your landlord's permission. Because I tell you what, if you just give tenants the ability to do that on their own without clearing it with you first, if you're a landlord or a property manager, next thing you know, they're going to be painting your walls black. I've seen it. Tenants will start painting it like weird colors, dark brown or black or this one girl, she was a Hello Kitty fanatic. She painted her bedroom this Pepto-Bismol pink. I tell you what, this is when I was the superintendent of that apartment building. The landlords allowed it, but they said that, hey, if you're going to paint it, you need to paint it back to a neutral eggshell color before you move out. And then when she goes to move out eventually, a couple of years later, she's like, oh, I don't want to deal with doing the paint. You do it. You take care of that. Just take it out of my security deposit. And I was like, oh, now I got to go because now the landlords want me as the superintendent to now go painting it. So I go and prime it up, the coat of paint. And guess what? The walls are still pink. I primed it and painted it, and the walls bled through that pink color. So I put on another coat of primer. It bled through. Another coat of primer. Still bled through. I was like, oh, that should be enough by now. Let me put on another coat of paint. Put on a coat of paint. Still bled through. So what are we now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We got 5 layers of primers and paint on there now, and the pink color is still bleeding through. So I went to the paint store. I was like, what the hell do I got to do to stop this color from bleeding through? The guy started laughing. He's like, yeah, sometimes that happens. He's like, you got to buy this. This is a dark colored primer to cover those trouble colors, and then you could go lighter. So that's what I did. So I had to buy a special primer now, and then paint it, prime it again, and paint it again. So the tenant was now all mad because she didn't get any of her security deposit back. I'm like, I had to paint your bedroom 8 times. The materials involved, the labor involved, you should have did it yourself. I could justify it with the bill. So anyway, this is why written permission should be obtained from the landlord before the tenant does anything, even painting an apartment. And if the landlord gave a tenant to the lighting fixture, can they put in a ceiling fan lighting fixture? Sure. I would advise that you do it by getting a licensed electrician, because we don't want you destroying and burning down our house, right? Or killing yourself in the process. So yeah, you need to get a licensed electrician to do it. All right. give them that requirement. Now, after they do that and the tenant's ready to move out, sometimes those tenants are like, I'm taking that ceiling fan, I put it in. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Are you allowed to? No, you need their permission to improve it. What makes you think the landlord would give you permission to deconstruct those improvements? Not unless the landlord gave you written permission to do it, and I don't know why they would. So, yeah, fixtures cannot be removed by tenants because they're part of the real estate. Trade fixtures is a fixture used for business purposes. It is considered, even though it's attached to the real estate, like any regular fixture, like a chandelier or a lighting fixture or what have you, it is actually considered personal property owned by the tenant conducting their business. They are allowed to remove those trade fixtures as long as they remove them before the lease expires. Okay, so what is a fixture? A fixture is a personal item that is made part of the real estate, affixed to and attached to, made part of the real estate. It was an article that was once personal property that is now part of the real estate. Trade fixtures, well, they're personal property attached to the real estate, and they're still considered personal property because it's used to conduct a business, a trade. And the tenant can remove it as long as they remove it before the lease expires. If the lease expires and they did not remove it, that trade fixture just became a fixture and part of the real estate and now owned by the landlord. You guys understand that whole process there? Fixtures are what kind of property? There's only two kinds of property in this world, personal or real. Fixtures are what kind of property?
Personal?
Real. They're part of the real estate because you attached it. It's an item that was once personal property that you now attached to and made it part of the real estate.
Okay.
Trade fixtures, on the other hand, the word trade indicates a business. So these are fixtures needed to conduct a business. It's considered personal property still. Unless, how can a trade fixture become a fixture and part of the real estate that's owned by the landlord? If you didn't remove it before the lease expired. These are exam questions, by the way. Okay, so I got all that explained here, so I don't have to read it over again because I just explained that to you. So these are some other examples of trade fixtures. A barber's chair that may be bolted to the floor, gas station pumps, sinks in a beauty salon, shelving in a supermarket, the hoods and ranges in a restaurant, things of that nature. So let's highlight on page 240 where it says improvements. Above that, trade fixtures. They're tangible personal property / chattel. Trade fixtures are chattel. It's tangible personal property. And then highlighted is customary to provide that such trade fixtures may be removed by the tenant before the lease expires. Let me know when you guys are done.
I got it.
Okie dokie. So leases carry with it an implied warranty of habitability, meaning that when you lease a premises, you expect it to be fit for human habitation, and there are no conditions present that would cause a threat to the health or safety of its occupants. Tenants must return the premises in the same condition as received. Landlords responsible for repairs, unless specified otherwise in the lease. Tenants, of course, are responsible for any damages that they do. Let me catch up with, find this slide here. Hold on a second. Please. Spelling that wrong. Premises. I'll figure it out later. Premises. How the hell do you spell premises? I'll figure it out. Anyway, the DCA, the Department of Community Affairs, inspects buildings with 3 or more units, not counting the unit the landlord lives in, at least once every 5 years. This is referred to as the green card inspection. It has nothing to do with immigration. That's not the kind of green card we're talking about. We refer to it as the green card. That's our industry lingo, because over the years, just like our real estate licenses used to be printed on these green paper, cardboard paper that had a watermarks on it, to show that they're legit. Well, when the state inspects your property and you pass the inspection, they send you a certificate, a card that is green, that then has to be posted in the public area somewhere, like in the hallways or something, that shows that it passed that state inspection that's required to be passed once every 5 years. Okay. And if you're selling one of these properties that have 3 or more rental units, and the landlord's not going to be living in there, so there's 3 rental units available, if it's a 3-family house, or if it's a 4-family house, regardless if the landlord's living it or not, there's 3 rental units, it would require that state inspection every 5 years. So if you're showing a house to a buyer and they look at that green card that's in the hallway, it may not be green anymore because the state doesn't send those out. They may send you a link where you could print it out on regular paper, and then the landlord still has to post it up. Look at the date on it, when it was done. Because it needs to be done every 5 years. And if it's coming up on that green card inspection date where it needs to be renewed again, I suggest that you request that the owner update the green card and get the new green card inspection before you go through with the purchase. Because to get the green card, that's state inspectors that come out for that. And state inspectors, they're tough cookies. They could find something wrong with new construction. Okay, so you're really they may give you a really big punch list for the owner to do all kinds of work. So make sure that they get that done before the buyer purchases a property that then they find out they got to do all this work from it. Get that state inspector to come in there and do that state inspection first. Okay, that's just my advice, my little 2 cents to you. Now, if rent is withheld by a tenant to force the landlord to make necessary repairs due to uninhabitable, dangerous conditions, it should be placed in escrow to pay the landlord later. All that back rent that you withhold from the landlord must be paid later. You get tenants all the time that they're like, I know my rights, I read it, I can withhold rent in New Jersey until you do the repair. And then the landlord does the repair, and then they think they only start paying the rent from that day forward because I don't have to pay rent until you do the repair. However, they misinterpret this and should always consult with an attorney first. An attorney would have told that tenant, make sure you still keep that money that you're withholding from rent, because when the landlord does complete the repair, you don't just start paying rent from that day forward. You got to pay back all the back rent that you've been withholding from that landlord. You were still in possession of those premises. And even if you weren't, you moved out, if you had any of your stuff there still, you were still in possession of the premises. So you got to pay the rent. Implied warranty of habitability. We could do the highlights now on this, the green card. On exams, they'll just refer to it as the state inspection. I'm introducing the term green card to you because that's the industry lingo. You're going to hear other agents saying, is the house up to date on the green card? Or is the green card up to date? And you're going to be like, huh? You know, I'm just trying to give you guys a heads up so you go into this industry sounding a little more educated so you have a little more understanding of it, okay? This is the industry lingo, not the official terms, but the terms that most real estate agents use when they talk about the state inspection. Let me know when you got all those notes down, okay? I'll give you guys a moment.
Got it.
Really? You guys write pretty quick. Anybody still writing or everybody good? All right. So once again, state inspection, often referred to as the green card inspection. Here's my explanation of it. That's the industry's lingo for it, not the official name. It's required for any building with 3+ rental units, not counting the unit landlord lives in. The DCA, the Department of Community Affairs, performs those inspections on behalf of the state. State inspection must be performed at least once every 5 years for buildings with 3 or more rental units. Motels and hotels, they need to be inspected at least once every 3 years. However, those inspections can be spot inspections without a prior notice or appointment. When heat is included in the rent, between October 1 and May 1, the building must be heated to at least 68 degrees between 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. and at least 65 degrees at night. Now, I've had people give me this response. That's freezing. No, it ain't. 32 degrees is. You complain about, you're not paying, all right? But that's usually when the complaints come in. But look, even if you are paying a rent, I know some landlords that the heat that's included, they're like, yeah, that oil is expensive, you know, and they don't keep it as warm as they should. Anyway, you cannot turn off the water, heat, or gas or any services if they are included in the rent, if the tenant is failing to pay the rent. All right. Typical lease restrictions. Typically, leases restrict a tenant from subletting. We refer to this as assignment, where a tenant assigns their duties to someone else, their obligations to someone else. If a landlord were to allow it, the tenant still holds primary responsibility that signed the lease originally. So if the person they're subletting to does not follow the lease contractual terms and pay the rent on time as well, the original tenant's still liable. The only way they could get out of that liability is if you novate the parties to the contract, or novate the contract through novation. So subleasing transfers the lease if the landlord permits it, but the original tenant would still be responsible. Of course, tenants are always responsible for any damages they do. Here are the time frames you should put a highlighted box around that the landlord needs to give the tenant notice to quit, or the tenant needs to give the landlord notice to quit if they're not renewing a lease. State for years, we know, no notice is needed. Why not? Because there's an expiration date in the lease. Tenancy at will, 3 months notice. Periodic estates have varying periods. Week to week, 1 week's notice, month to month, 1 month's notice, and year to year, 3 months notice. Truth in renting booklet needs to be given to who?
To the tenants and landlords too.
All needs to give it to tenants in buildings with 3 or more rental units. So not all landlords, not all situations. It's the landlord's responsibility, or if they're hiring us, then we got to give it. But it's the landlord's responsibility to provide the truth in renting booklet to the tenants. The truth in renting booklet is an annually published, they publish annually updated statements of the rights and duties of residential landlords and tenants in the form of a booklet, which is printed. You can download the PDFs. It's available in English and Spanish. It applies to any residential property requiring the green card inspection. And which ones are those? The ones with 3 or more rental units, not counting the unit the landlord lives in. So if it's a 2-family house, does it require the state inspection or the green card inspection? Or the green card, the truth in renting booklet? No. If it's 3-family house and the landlord lives in one of the units, you required to give the truth in renting booklet or get the state inspection? No. If it's a 3-family house and the landlord does not live there, then it requires the state inspection because there's 3 or more rental units. Or if it's a 4-family house or more, then it doesn't matter if the landlord lives there or not. It requires the state inspection once every 5 years, and all tenants must be given a copy of the truth in renting booklet. And the truth in renting booklet needs to be put somewhere in the common area, like the hallway or whatnot. All right. This also includes mobile homes. It does not apply to commercial real estate. And DCA does the inspections, the state inspections, and they also are the ones that publish this booklet for the tenants' rights and the duties of the landlords. So here, let me copy this. I'll give this to you right now. Oh. The landlords can just notify the tenants, in the lease, have a link to the truth in renting booklets, but they should also print out a copy and give it to the tenants and have the tenants sign off that the landlord printed a copy and gave it to them so that they can't be whining later, computer or the printer that works or whatever. Yeah, because they're going to come up with an excuse. There you go. Boom. All right, so beginning March 20th, 2024, landlords must provide a notice to prospective tenants whether the rental property is located in FEMA's special flood hazard area or moderate flood hazard area, and actual knowledge that the rental premises or any portion of the premises, such as tenant parking spaces, have been subjected to flooding. And so here is a copy of that flood risk notice as well. Let me get that out to you. A lot of information you got to know to give if you're a landlord or if you're in real estate, huh? See, is this notice the same as this? Let's check it out. Flood risk notice. All right, now let's see. Is that the same flood risk notice or is there something else? No, that one highlighted as well at the same time. So that's the same notice, which I just sent to you guys as well. Pursuant to whatever law is applicable to rental property at this address, if any or property is located wholly or partly in a flood zone, 100-year flood zone, 1% annual chance floodplain, you have to have flood insurance. Let's see, if it's in a 500-year flood zone, it's a moderate risk. It means there's a 0.2% chance of a floodplain. That means the property will probably flood at least once every 500 years. Okay. And this is the disclosure. We also need to tell people that climate change is causing our sea levels to rise. And by a very specific year of 2050, you're all going to be underwater. And you need to know that because we could tell the future. All right. So, truth in renting disclosures once again. So here's where you would highlight it now in the book. On page 242. Third paragraph down. Truth in renting and what it is. I don't like the way that their definition is here, so I just crossed out whatever was there. I whited it out and I wrote the number 3 before the word units. So whatever it says there, I don't even know what it says there anymore. You see, I have it in my book. More than 2 units or more than 3 if the landlord occupies. Okay. So the act requires residential landlords of dwellings with 3 units or more than 3 units, if the landlord occupies one of the units, to distribute the truth in renting statement. There you go. Having the statement more than 2 units is confusing. What is more than 2? It is 3. So I hate the backwards way that they write some of these things in the book, though. Believe me, this is one of the better books. It's still awful. I'm gonna write my own book. So I got the notes here. Truth in renting booklet must be given to tenants in buildings requiring the state green card inspection, 3+ unit rental units, not counting the unit landlord lives. Or you could just write required to be given to tenants in buildings with 3 plus units, not counting unit landlord lives in. Somebody rang the doorbell. Let me know when you got it.
Yeah, we got it.
Anybody still taking notes there? GA, you good? Yeah, you good? Need notes? All right.
I got it.
Okay. So there's a disclosure of the owners and who the property managers are to the tenants. The tenants need to know who to contact if there's an emergency. The city does too, but it should be written in the lease who that emergency contact is. So the owners and property managers and their contact information should be disclosed on the lease to the tenants. So the names and addresses of the owner and residential managers must be on file with the local government and state agencies when they register the property for rental use, and it needs to be written in the lease so the tenant has access. Tenants also need to be notified when subsidized federal crime insurance is available to them from HUD, and when the property's in a high-risk area. Why don't they say what is a high-risk area? High crime area? I don't know what you need subsidized crime insurance for. I don't know what that covers. Isn't it just renter's insurance? I mean, for less than $100, you could get like $65,000 coverage of in renter's insurance. So I don't know why you'd need a subsidy on that. The Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, we went over this in chapter 4. The ADA was created to prevent discrimination in the workplace against people with disabilities. So Title III of the ADA prohibits discrimination in commercial buildings, requiring them to be handicap accessible for their employees, but also for their patrons. It states that all new construction has to be handicap accessible because it's a lot easier when you're building a building from a structure from scratch to make it handicap accessible, rather than trying to retrofit an older building. So for existing structures, the ADA recommends reasonably achievable accommodations to provide full and equal access to the facilities and services. So what is reasonably achievable accommodations? That means with little cost, without massive retrofitting or remodeling. And trust me, when talking to the government, that is quite subjective, what they consider to be little costs, because they often do not live in the same reality as the normal human being does. So it's useful to consult ADA experts and architectural designers when making things handicap accessible. Some examples of reasonably achievable accommodations we'll go over in the next slides. So let's just do the highlights now here. Americans with Disability Act, ADA. Title III prohibits discrimination in commercial properties. You need to know that for exam. And it protects owners from that massive expense of extensive remodeling and what does the ADA recommend for existing structures? Reasonably achievable accommodations to the facilities and services. So you need to know the ADA pertains to what kinds of properties and what is their recommendations for making older properties handicap accessible.
But there will be some inspectors that will give you a CO that's supposed to establish whether it's reasonable or not.
No, that's inspect and fail you or pass you. You got to get those ADA inspect, like, there was a building that I was going to buy in Edison. And so I went there first to, down to the city, and I was like, okay, I'm thinking about buying this property. I want to get the, CO inspection for it. I want to use it for this purpose, blah, 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 blah. The inspector came over because it was right across the street from City Hall there on Route 27. And he came over, he took a look at it, and we walked in the front door. And before we walk in the front door, he's like, okay, you need to put a ramp in here. Ramp. There's no steps. Why do I got to put a ramp in? Oh, because the lip for the front door is more than 3/4 of an inch, so it requires that you put in a ramp. Oh, well, I'll do it. I'll just cut off a block with a little bit of a He's like, no, it needs to be the aluminum ramps with the handlebars. I'm like, you talking about like those ones that go for like $5,000 and $10,000 that are like 10 feet long to go up a thing because of a 3/4 of an inch, because this is 1 inch instead of 3/4 of an inch lip on the door. Yeah.
What?
I was like, I see where this is going already. We didn't even get inside. Now we're going in through the whole inside, and he's like, okay, everything here seems pretty good, but the bathroom needs to be made handicap accessible for wheelchairs. So I turn around and I'm looking down the hallway, and it was like, how's a wheelchair getting to the bathroom? This is a narrow hallway that won't even accommodate a wheelchair. Well, the bathroom needs to be handicap accessible. It's like totally uncommon sense. Yeah. Like, okay, it makes more sense just to tear down this building and build a new one from scratch, because it's really stupid making a bathroom handicap accessible to accommodate a wheelchair when a wheelchair can't even get to the bathroom. Yeah.
So how did you get out of it?
I didn't buy it.
Oh, okay.
I didn't buy it. I said, screw this. I just asked him, I was like, well, I'm thinking about buying the building across the street. I was like, before I buy it, I like to get the CO inspection here. So I got the city inspector to go out. Is right across the street, and he started like spitting out all this. And he's like, "But what you should do is you really should consult with an ADA expert, an architectural engineer, and then on how to make these accommodations." And he gave me a business card, because they all got business cards for their preferred people that they want to use. And I was like, well, how much is he going to charge me for a consultation? And he said about $5,000. I'm like, F this, for a consultation. It's like, I could see where it's going already with you, Yeah. So what is reasonably achievable accommodations? That's very subjective.
It's up to inspect.
Right. There's all that other stuff for. Okay, these are on different pages. Right, service animals was first, and then this stuff's on the next page. Okay, so I got this stuff in the same order as the book. Okay, so the service animals, we've already gone over this one. We've even had this slide, I think, in a previous chapter 4. We know about service animals, right? They must be allowed in residential rentals if the tenant has that letter from their doctor or therapist saying that they have a need for a service animal, which includes an emotional support animal. However, in public accommodations for commercial properties and such, because we're not restricted to doing residential real estate, when can a service animal be denied access? Well, emotional support animals do not need to be allowed, but those animals, service animals that perform tasks, must be. And all you could ask are two questions. Is the animal required because of a disability? And what work or task has the animal been trained to perform? You can't ask them for a letter from their doctor, or if they have a card or a permit or something. Where's the animal's vest? Shouldn't they be wearing a vest that says service animal? No, no, no. So, reasonable accommodations means providing doors with automatic opening mechanisms, installing an intercom so customers can contact the second floor business in a building with an elevator, adding grab bars to public restroom stalls, providing shopper's assistance to help disabled customers, providing menus that have large print or braille format, lower public telephones, permit guide dogs to accompany customers, or to provide ramps in addition to entry stairs. All right, rental referral agencies, we went over this at the end of chapter 1 in the book when we did that, if you guys recall. So what did we have highlighted there? If any prospective tenants are charged an advance fee of more than $25, regulations require depositing those funds in an escrow account. Units that are advertised must be checked every day to see if they're still available, and units that are listed in the MLS but not advertised elsewhere must be checked every 3 days to see if they're still available. Because this is rental referral agencies, if you recall, is where the real estate agent gets into an agreement with an apartment complex or building owner, and they get an agreement that they're going to pay them a referral fee if they find them a renter and go under contract with them. Now, these apartment complexes usually have their own rental offices, so they could rent them out on their own. So if that's the case, we need to call up every day if we're marketing or advertising a property to make sure that one of those units are still available. Because are you allowed to advertise a property that's not available? No, that's false advertising. So we need to check every day. If it's advertised, we need to check every 3 days if it's just listed. Rent control laws are set by each municipality. We already went over this. Here now, we could just write that in there on page 244. Where's that title there? This is under rent control. Yeah. The last paragraph. Just right next to that, rules are set by each municipality if they have them. Now, those rent control laws, they're kind of a double-edged sword as well. A lot of people consider rent control this double-edged sword because they're meant, the purpose of rent control laws were meant to deal with bad landlords who take advantage of their tenants. However, a lot of these rent control rules are not, they don't give much incentive for investors to buy these rental properties. Because over the years, they may not be able to raise the rents in line with, the cost to maintain these buildings. And the problem is they're not going to be able to raise the rents and collect maintain the buildings, and they let the buildings start to crumble. And then the city could start coming down on the landlord because they're letting it fall apart and becoming a slumlord. So there's not much incentive to start building rental properties in areas that have these rent control. So rent control laws are set by each municipality. Not all municipalities have them, have rent control. Laws are put in place to prevent abusive landlords from taking advantage of tenants. It controls raising the rents, charging late fees, or even being able to do evictions. You, as a licensee, should be careful when showing rental properties for sale to investors, especially if they seem like they're low priced. And if you look at the rents and the rents seem like they're below market rates, you better be careful with your puffing. Don't be like, wow, this property is priced pretty good. Take a look at the rents too. They should, this is way below what you could get in rents. You could always jack up the rent over here. You better be careful and not say that unless you know that they can, because if it's a town that has rent control, that may be why the rents are so low. Because they were not permitted to raise the rents in line with inflation. Okay, so individual communities, the municipalities, set their own rent control regulations. And some form of rent control is in effect in almost 1/4 of the state's municipalities. So we got to be careful before doing any puffing or assuming that these properties are underpriced and the rents can always be raised. Most limit allowable yearly rent increases. So to encourage construction of more rental housing units, new construction is exempt from rent control while the initial mortgage is still in effect. Although rent control clearly benefits tenants, many argue that in the long run it can hurt them because it could discourage investors from putting up rental housing and can cause a hardship to landlords who can't bring their rents up to fair market values, encouraging them to let those buildings deteriorate and eventually abandon them. Hell, some places in New York, you have the city of in New York, they give away buildings that the city may have taken from landlords that become slumlords and let their buildings fall apart. Or they were just abandoned by the owners. So the city takes these properties and they actually sell them to investors. Well, they don't sell them, they give them to investors who show that they have the history of being able to manage such buildings, and they have the financial ability to bring them up to standards, because they've been allowed to fall apart. Yeah, they give it to them for free. That's in New York. Haven't really seen that in New Jersey, except in Newark. Newark, I think I've seen that before. All right. Condo conversions. We went over this in an earlier chapter as well. Who can be evicted from a building that you're going to convert into a condo? So a multifamily house or an apartment building that you're going to convert it to condominiums where each unit is deeded and you could sell it and charge a monthly maintenance fee to the tenants. Well, those that are aged, if the tenants meet all of these three criteria, they cannot be evicted and they have to be allowed to remain as tenants for the next 40 years. Those that are age 62 and older, or certain disabled persons that have that have been living there for at least 2 years before the conversion began, and their income is no greater than 3 times their county's per capita income, or in any case, no more than $50,000 a year. They're allowed to, if they meet all those criteria, they're allowed to remain as tenants for the next 40 years. Yeah. I think I've seen a Law and Order episode about this, except it wasn't for condos. It was for a cooperative building. I don't know, it could have been a condo, where that person that was a renter and still paying like $400 a month rent was murdered. And they suspected the landlord murdered them because there was some incentive there for that because these units have been converted to condos years ago and they're going for millions of dollars, yet this person's still allowed to be there as a renter paying $400 a month. You guys ever see that episode, Law and Order? Or one similar to it? Anyway. So eviction. Who cannot be evicted? Here we can put a highlighted box around it. Where'd everybody go? Let me throw out the after lunch attendance poll there for everybody, especially since everybody disappeared off screen here. Make sure I'm not talking to myself. Come on, somebody run around and answer all the polls on the computers. Constructive eviction is action taken by the tenant to legally terminate their lease if the landlord fails to provide basic services and make essential repairs. If those buildings become uninhabitable. The tenant would first need to notify the landlord that there's a problem so that they're aware something is going on. And then if they don't fix it, vacate, move out, and notify, and then stop paying rent, and then notify the landlord they're terminating the lease early due to constructive eviction. This is a way that a tenant can get out of a lease legally early when the landlord fails to make basic repairs. Now, we're not talking about because they didn't paint the apartment. We're talking about when there's uninhabitable conditions like this example this is a real life example that I had here once in Edison. I had a landlord, he had a lot of properties and, he hired me to find a renter for the basement unit apartment here. He has a house, it's a one-family house. It's actually grandfathered as a two-family. So he was allowed to, he had this separate entrance that he put there to the outside to the basement. So I found him, it was my listing, and then I found a renter, a single mom with a newborn baby. It was in her price range. She liked it. She's like, okay, it's clean, it's nice. I'll move there. So she moves there. Couple months later, she gives me a call, tells me, Vic, what do I do? I got the landlord here. He doesn't like accepting phone calls. He doesn't usually answer them. However, he's very responsive with text messages and emails, but he's not responding to me now. I was like, well, what's the problem? Every time the people upstairs flush the toilet, it comes out in my tub. And I first noticed this when I was bathing my newborn. Now, you know when you got the newborn baby, you put them in the little plastic tubs that go inside the tub or sink, So she had the baby inside that little plastic tub, inside the tub, And they flushed the toilet upstairs and boom, it came out into her bathtub while she was bathing the baby. That is disgusting. That is foul. Can you imagine you taking a shower during that or having a baby that you're bathing like that? I would be flipping out. She said she'd been trying to reach out to him and he's just ignoring her on the topic. So I said, well, do you have any place? I was like, can you document that you've reached out to him multiple times? Yes, she could. I was like, okay, well, then this is what you should do. Do you have somebody, a friend that you could temporarily move in with? So maybe you could move out of here, move all your stuff out, then stop paying rent and notify the landlord you're terminating your lease early due to constructive eviction and you want all your security deposit back. There's not a damn thing he could do about it. But before you do this, I would suggest you go down to the Department of Health in Edison. They're the ones that control the rentals there, and file a complaint with them. And I'm also going to give you the phone number of an attorney that you could call so that he can handle so he could tell you that I'm giving you the right advice, because this is legal advice and I don't want to jam you up telling you to do the wrong thing. Okay. So make sure you talk to this attorney. He's not going to charge you anything. Just tell him that I told you to call him. And she did. He confirmed I gave her the right advice, and she did this. And when she goes down to the health department there in Edison, the one girl looked over to the other, and she was like, "Guess who it is?" And they were like, "No." They're like, "Yep." And like they know him by first name. They're like, "Yeah, this guy, he refuses to do stuff all the time until we go down there and write him a citation and force him to do the repair." So basically, what happened here? Well, this is what happened. The main sewer pipe, where all of the water waste goes out to the street to the main sewer, on his property before it got to the street, the pipe collapsed for whatever reason, whether it had roots, tree roots, or whatever it is. The pipe collapsed. So anytime they flush the toilet upstairs, it goes down, hits that collapsed pipe, backs up to the lowest place, which is the tub in the basement, and then it slowly drains out. And it would do that until he repaired the collapsed pipe, which would cost him about $2,000 to do. And he was just trying to put that off. Now, the interesting thing is here, after she moved out and did all this, guess who I got a call from? I got a call out of the blue from the landlord. Now, he didn't know that I was talking to her at all, but he called me up yelling and screaming at me that he wants his commission back. Why? Well, because I paid you a commission for a tenant that was going to be there for a year, and she wasn't there for the full year. And I was like, wow, this guy got balls. So I said, you know what? She called me up and told me what you were doing, and that was pretty messed up. Why weren't you reaching out to her? I was like, that's something like a slumlord would do. You're not a slumlord, are you? You know, I was like, you're calling me demanding commission because she moved out. Dude, it's disgusting. Would you live in a place where the sewer's backing up into your tub? That's disgusting. And then he started yelling, threatening to sue me if I didn't pay him the commission back. You know, and I was like, well, I earned my commission when I produced a ready, willing, and able renter. We signed the lease. They gave you the money. You gave her the keys. The lease inception date came about. We had the city inspections done. Everything was honky-dory. I earned my commission. Now it's a landlord-tenant issue. If you can't hold on to your tenants because you want to be a slumlord, that's your problem. I'm going to suit. Click. I hung up on him. I basically told him that he could go screw himself and that I don't want his business. I'm not going to get him another tenant if he's going to be treating them like that. By the way, the guy was an attorney too, so he should know better. You know, you figure that he would know better, but he's trying to throw his weight around as attorney, threatening lawsuits. He should know better than that. You know, so constructive eviction. In this regard, it seems like it's a positive thing where a tenant can take action and terminate a lease early. But sometimes landlords use this to get rid of tenants, knowing that the tenant is going to take this action so that they could then get the tenant to terminate the lease early and get out because the landlord's not doing the essential repairs that they're supposed to be doing, so that they could then get a new tenant in that's going to pay a higher rent after they do the repair. That's illegal when they do that, by the way. But you need to know action taken by a tenant to terminate the lease due to uninhabitable conditions.
I
Constructive.
have a question.
Yes.
So if the landlord wants to evict the tenant, so he needs to do that through court.
You need some.
He needs to do that procedure through court if the landlord wants to like evict the tenant. And if the tenant wants to get eviction from the lease, so they don't need to go to the court.
Correct. Because when the landlord's trying to kick out a tenant, you're trying to revoke their rights. You can't
Mm-hmm.
their rights, only the judge can. If you could prove that the tenant violated the terms of the lease that granted them those rights to begin with, that you're trying to revoke. However, a tenant who has rights, you ever see cops? You have the right to remain silent if you give up that right. Can you give up your right and just leave? Yeah. Now, you'd be in breach of contract for your lease and the landlord can chase after you. But if it's due to a inevitable condition and you could document it. So I had her go down, file a complaint with the health department. She had documentation of all the times she tried reaching out to him and what his responses were when he responded and the fact that he wasn't doing anything to fix this repair. He had nothing. If he tried taking her to court, she held all the cards. So yeah, she does not need to go to court to terminate the lease. She could just do these things and then notify the landlord, hey, I'm terminating my lease early to constructive eviction and you need to pay me back my security deposit now in full. Okay,
Okay. Thank you.
you're welcome. Now, constructive eviction is different from the normal eviction that we're used to, where the landlord's the one that takes the action. This is known as a suit for possession or actual eviction. Actual eviction is that action taken by the landlord. The eviction is the process of the court revoking the tenant's rights if the tenant breaches the terms of the lease. Landlord would file for what's called a summary or dispossess proceeding to take the possession of the premises away from the tenant, to dispossess them from it. A landlord must provide a notice to quit to the tenant before they could file for eviction for anything that they're doing that violates the terms of the lease, except for non-payment of rent. Non-payment of rent is the only reason a landlord does not need to serve a tenant with a notice to quit before they could start the eviction process. The only exception, well, there we go. I just said that. So, how much notice is needed to be provided to a tenant before filing eviction for various lease breaking activities? Well, there's actually a guide here that's in the book on page 245 and 246. I call it the Landlord's Guide for Giving Tenant Notice to Quit. Now, we don't need to study that. We don't need to know that for exams. It's just very helpful for you if you're going to be dealing with renters or if you yourself are a renter. But for exam purposes, you do need to know what is the only reason the landlord does not need to provide a notice to quit to the tenant before filing for eviction. And that would be non-payment of rent. So let's do these highlights first before we show you that list. 245, constructive eviction, right next to that. Action taken by tenant to legally terminate lease early due to uninhabitable condition. Let me know when everybody's got the notes and the highlights there for constructive eviction and actual eviction. Both of these you'll probably see on exam.
I got it.
All right. Everybody good? Take your silence as a yes. All right, so here are the causes for eviction where you need to provide notice to the tenants before you can start the eviction process. Listen, if a landlord starts eviction process, they file for eviction with the court to get the tenant out because they're violating the lease in some way. The first thing the landlord will do, has anybody here ever been to that landlord tenant court and just like sat in the back and watched it? You know, if you're ever there, you start to see patterns, and you could be like, how can a judge do this all day? You know, it's like the same thing over and over. Like you start to see the same excuses from different people. You start to see the same reactions. There's like different types of people that go to landlord tenant court, and you could even put them in categories. You know, um, and one thing that you'll notice though is anytime the eviction is due to anything other than non-payment of rent, the landlord turns to the judge turns to the landlord, their attorney, their representative, and says, was proper notice served? And they say yes. Now, if you don't know what they're talking about, it kind of like goes over your head. But if you notice, they say that for every case, was proper notice served? Was proper notice served? And they say yes, proper notice was served, and then they give them some paperwork to show that proper notice was served. Because if proper notice was not served, the landlord will throw it out of court. Will evict the tenant if they did not serve proper notice to the tenant. So what is this proper notice? Well, let's take a look. Here I have it on one page. I think this version of the book, it's split between two. On the bottom of page 245, and it moves on to 246. Here's from a previous version of the book where it was all on one page. I like to call it the landlord, I know it's a little wordy, the landlord's guide for giving tenant notice to quit before they can file for eviction. I like to explain what the hell it is. All right. Now, I have highlighted here only one item. The non-payment of rent, no notice to quit needs to be given before the suit is filed. But any of these reasons, the landlord needs to serve proper notice to the tenant. Like if the tenant has disorderly conduct, the landlord needs to serve notice to the tenant that they need to stop whatever lease breaking activity they're doing. Hey, you're being disorderly. Here is the paperwork that says we've been notified and we checked it and we spoke that you were being disorderly, and this is your notice to stop being disorderly. Okay. If we get another complaint about it, then we could file for the notice to evict you over your disorderly conduct. Destruction or damage of the premises due to the tenant's gross negligence. 3 days notice is required. You know, some things it's like 3 days, some things it's a month, some things 2 notices need to be provided. You really got to go through all of these things. Oh, look at this. Conversion of a building. I never noticed this one. Conversion of a building or mobile park to a condominium, cooperative, or dwelling units. 3 years and 2 months notice required. Well, we already knew that, but I never even bothered looking at that on the list there. But by the way, okay. Look, certain cases for conviction of drug-related offense. New Jersey Anti-Eviction Act provides only for a few exceptions for tenants who are currently paying rent payments may not be evicted solely on the grounds of foreclosure. That is true whether or not the tenant has a written lease. Okay, yeah. If your tenant, if you're getting foreclosed on, if the property owner is getting foreclosed on, they cannot terminate the lease for foreclosure. Even if it's the bank forecloses, now it's a bank-owned property, they have to honor the lease. They cannot evict the tenant. This is important for us to know, because in the past, banks asset managers have come to us as real estate agents, and they knew that it's illegal. So they came to us and said, hey, we'll pay you if you go to the tenant and offer them cash for keys. They even came up with a name for the program, Cash for Keys, where they would give $1,000, a couple $1,000 to the tenant if they would agree to terminate their lease early and get out. So they would pay us as real estate agents to go to them and make that offer, to offer them, to give them cash if they can't, if agree to walk away from the lease and cancel it. No, because that's depriving the tenants of their rights, and it's a form of intimidation. So you would be violating the law and could possibly lose your license over it. So the Real Estate Commission, if you go to their website, I think to this day they still have something about that up there showing that this is an illegal practice and we cannot do it. And it's referred to as cash for keys. All right. Anyway, moving on. So we went over types of leasehold estates earlier at the beginning of this chapter. Now we're going to go over types of leases, not leasehold estates, but the types of leases. That's the contract, which goes over the payment and what's included. So on page 246, highlight the title, Types of Leases, and right next to that, payment and what's included. So we have a gross lease. This is common in residential. It can be found in commercial, but it's more common in residential. Where the lessee, that's the tenant, pays their basic rent, and the lessor, that's the landlord, pays all the property charges, the taxes, the repairs, and insurance connected with the property. More common in commercial real estate and industrial real estate is a net lease. In a net lease, the tenant pays their rent plus all or most of the property charges. If the tenant is paying all the property charges in addition to their rent, it's referred to as a triple net lease, or they could be expressed by just having three ends. That's called a triple net lease, where the tenant pays their basic rent and all the property expenses, except for the mortgage financing charges, which the property owner is responsible for paying. So it really pays to be a commercial landlord, because you could pass on all your expenses to the tenant, even the taxes, the insurance, everything. You could pass all those expenses on to the tenant. Plus, you get that added bonus that your tenants call you Lord. Daddy, right?
But you have to build all the ramps first. That's what it is.
But if there were an area, there's you got loading docks where the trucks pull up to the. But I got a triple net lease with my landlord. It was supposed to be just a net lease. It ended up being a triple net lease because there's some cheap MFers. I tell you, it's gotten worse. I'm looking for a new place to get the hell out of where I'm at right now. They're charging me to. I'm renting 5% of the total building space where the school is, right? And the landlords, they paid to have all the parking lots repaved. I got like 5 parking spots. The rest is on the street, and those 5 parking spots aren't even available to me most of the time because the other tenants, I got their employees taking them up, even though they're assigned to my business, And so they got me paying 5% of the cost to repave a parking lot that gets destroyed every year by all the tractor trailers in the other units, the other tenants. I'm in a building, I'm on the second floor above a warehouses, So they're like, those tractor trailers are destroying the parking lot And it's like every year it's getting repaved, and they're like, yeah, you got to pay thousands and thousands of dollars every year to repave the parking lot. That's my 5%. You know, I got to pay 5% of the landscaping. I got to percent of the landlord's insurance on the building, not counting my insurance I got to carry as a business. I got to pay 5% of what we call CAM charges, common area maintenance charge. So percentage leases, this is common in retail properties like shopping centers. The tenant pays a small basic rent plus a percentage of their gross sales. It may pay property costs as well, but the landlord usually pays some or all of the property expenses. We're going to get into these in a little more detail right now. So once again, gross lease, common in residential leases, but can be used in commercial. The tenant pays their fixed rent. The landlord pays all taxes, insurance, mortgage payments, and repairs connected with the property. In a net lease, the tenant pays the rent and some of the property charges, whatever was agreed to in their lease. In a triple net lease, the tenant pays the rent and all other property expenses to maintain the property. They call that CAM, common area maintenance charge, except for debt services, the mortgage loan. That they cannot pass on to the tenant. This is often used in commercial and industrial properties. And there we go, because it's not here in the book. I got it just here on this slide. CAM is common area maintenance charge. Each tenant must pay their share of these fees proportionate with the percentage of the total space of the building that they're renting. Like I told you, I'm renting 5% of the total space of the building. I'm renting 2,000 square feet. That's 5% of the total square footage of the building that I'm in. I'm responsible for 5% of all of the CAM charges. Leave that there if you guys want to snap a picture of this slide for your notes. Okay. So here's the things to highlight pertaining to those things that we just saw on that slide. For the gross lease, so let me know when you got it so I could change the slide to the next one for you to highlight.
Got it.
But yeah, by the way, this is a screenshot from the older version book. This newer version book, this guy that made these edits, he puts in a lot of these things that he calls easy ways to remember things. Cross out that last sentence he has there under gross lease because it's horrible. I can't even read to you what it says, but what does it say? I crossed it out pretty bad. Let me see. Remember when the landlord has to pay. Let me give me glasses. Maybe I could figure it out. When the landlord has to pay all the property charges, the landlord thinks that's gross, making it a gross lease. Stupid explanation. Anyway, the landlord thinks it's gross when they got to pay all the property charges, so it's a gross lease. Is that going to help you remember that? Whatever. Net lease, just right next to that, these notes, triple net, common, commercial, industrial, and do the highlights. And also write CAM, common area maintenance charges. Hey, everybody get that? Still doing the highlights or?
I need a second.
Okay, doke.
I got it.
All right. Everybody else good? Everybody got this?
Yep, I got it.
Okie doke. Here's how you calculate rents on commercial properties usually. Usually they don't tell you straight out what the monthly rent is. Usually they'll give you a price per square foot. Of course, all this stuff is negotiable, by the way. Don't forget that. But they may tell you that the rent is $20 per square foot. And they may not give you any information about CAM. I would like to ask them what historically have been the CAM charges on this unit, or what's the average. Now, it doesn't matter what they quote you. Whatever the actual expenses are is what the tenant will pay. And the landlord will usually provide the bills to back up to justify that they did pay those fees and costs. And then you could do your calculations on it. But in a triple net lease, this is the way it works. The tenant tells you, the landlord says it's $20 per square foot for the rent for 2,000 square foot of office space. And $5 per square foot for CAM is estimated. You should calculate these separately. Don't just add 20 plus 5 and then do 25 times 2,000. Because then you don't know what your actual rent is. You got to separate it from the CAM charges because CAM charges will vary. Taxes go up as insurance and any other fees, landscaping, snow removal, all that stuff, So you do the 2,000 square feet times the $20 per square foot. That's $40,000. That's not monthly. That's annually. So you divide it by 12, and that'll tell you what the monthly rent is. That's how you calculate. That's how you figure out what the rent is when commercial landlords give you hey, the rent is $20 per square foot. That's how you calculate what the monthly rent is. And then separately calculate the estimated CAM charges. If they said it's $5 per square foot estimated, well, that's a lot, but we could take a look. 2,000 times $5 per square foot, that's $10,000 a year divided by 12. That's an additional $833.33 per month. Now add it up, and there you go. Your total estimate is $4,166.66 a month. So now you could determine if you're the business that's supposed to be moving in here, is that within your budget that you calculated in your business plan? If not, you need to either negotiate on that or find a different place to rent. This is one problem with a lot of businesses, especially startup businesses. They go in, they try to rent the property, and they'll pay whatever the landlord quotes them. And, I come in there and I'm like, what are you paying for rent? And I know right off the bat, I could be like, you're going to be out of business in 6 months, because this is your expenses before you ever pay any employees, before you turn the lights on, before you buy any equipment or machinery or stock or inventory or your insurance or turn on the phone or get the internet connection or do any marketing or advertising. Look at that. $4,100 is a lot of money for like a place that's going to be selling gelato, right? I've actually seen something like this, but it was even more than that. The rent was way higher than that. I think it was $35 per square foot. And I was like, and you're selling what? Gelato? You're going to be out of business in 6 months. Sure enough, out of business in 6 months. You know, how could you sustain that on what you're selling? That's a lot of that frozen yogurt to be selling, right? Anyway, that's how you do the calculation. So percentage leases, these are common in large shopping centers, not strip malls typically, but in like like Woodbridge Mall, Menlo Park Mall, things of that nature, where the landlord charges a tenant a small fixed rent plus a percentage of their total gross income above a certain dollar amount. It depends. It can be set up however. You guys ever go to Woodbridge Mall or Menlo Mall, and there was like maybe a small store selling widgets, and whatever those widgets were, they were very busy selling them. They were selling a lot of them, and so the store was really busy. And then the next time you go to the mall, the store is gone, they're closed, and you're wondering what the hell happened. That place was always so busy. You guys ever see that in the mall? You ever wonder why they closed? Because they were so busy? Well, because the landlord may have had a rental agreement with these tenants that they have to pay a rent plus a percentage of their gross income. And the landlord may have had a minimum of gross income that the tenant had to get. But the money they were netting from those from the widgets they were selling was not enough to satisfy the landlord's voracious appetite. And so therefore, they terminated the lease and kicked them out. Other lease types discusses provisions added into longer term leases for rent escalations, like a variable lease, where you have a 5-10 year lease and you have predefined rent escalations written into the lease itself, either by a dollar amount or a percentage that the rent is going to go up. So you could see right from the time you sign the lease, you know what your rent is going to be 3 years from now. Okay. Some landlords can tie it to a cozy index, the cost of living index. They'll be like, yes, the rent escalation will be whatever the cozy index percentage is listed in the second Sunday of the month of whatever, as published in the New York Times, and then that's how they would figure it out. Now, ground leases, I told you before not to confuse ground leases with a land lease, a land contract. You guys remember what a land contract is? It's a type of seller financing where the owner doesn't give you the deed until you pay off the full amount owed. So a ground lease, do not confuse it with a land contract. Ground leases are a form of triple net lease. A ground lease is one where the tenant rents some land that they're going to construct a building on. So if you're going to rent land that you construct a building on, the taxes are definitely going to go up. So tenant's responsible for paying the taxes. And now there's going to be a building that needs to be maintained with a parking lot. The tenant's definitely going to be responsible for that as well. That's why ground leases are a form of triple net lease. And they're usually very long, because the juice got to be worth the squeeze on that one, right? If you're going to be renting the ground that you're going to construct, you're going to pay to construct a building on, the cost to construct that building, you better be renting it, get a long enough rental that it's going to pay for itself and then some. So 50-year to 1,000-year leases are not uncommon in ground leases. Look, here's some famous ground leases for you. The Empire State Building. the MetLife building, the Chrysler building in New York City. These are all in New York. The World Trade Centers were actually sitting on were actually a ground lease. The land was owned by the Port Authority of New York. Can you imagine constructing a skyscraper like that on land that you don't even own, that you're renting? You better get a long lease. The juice got to be worth the squeeze so that you can get paid back. Now, of course, most people don't live to be 1,000 years old, right? So why do they sign a 1,000-year lease? Well, because you got corporations, you've got funds that would own a lot of these buildings, and they would be around for a long time, maybe. I don't know. It's hard to say. Our country's only been around for a couple hundred years itself, right? So a 1,000-year lease, that's quite interesting, seeing as that country hasn't even been around that long yet. Now, a mineral lease, or sometimes referred to as an oil lease or a gas lease, or for other minerals. You guys ever see those TV shows like Alaskan Gold Rush? Where you got those guys that are out there digging dirt, running it through a sluice box, and working hard trying to get little bits of gold out of moving tons of dirt that they dug out of the ground. You guys ever see that show, Alaskan Gold Rush? It's interesting. They move tons and tons and tons. They got heavy equipment. They move tons of soil. They run it through this sluice box to shake out the little bits of gold out of all of that massive dirt. And they get this little bottle of gold, but that ends up being worth a lot of money. Okay. Now, how do these leases work? Well, it's usually that the tenant, it works kind of like the percentage lease that you would have in a shopping center, where a tenant will pay a fixed rent for the ability to dig and play in the dirt on your property. However, there's an agreement with the landlord that they'll split whatever gold they find with the landlord at some sort of a percentage split. And there may be an agreement, a further agreement, that the tenant needs to get at least X amount of gold out of the ground. And if the tenant can't do that, they obviously don't have the knowledge or the ability to how to find and get the gold out of the ground. So the landlord could terminate that lease early and get another crew in there that they're going to rent the land to, that knows how to that's more experienced and knows how to get the gold out of the ground. That's why if you ever watch that show, sometimes these guys get nervous. They're like, oh, we got a call. The landlord's coming next week. And everybody's like, oh, shoot, what do we got to do? Okay, let's stop all digging. Let's run all the pay dirt that we have right now, and let's see how much gold we got, so that we can see what our numbers are. So see if we should be shaking in our boots or not, because the landlord can kick them out and end their lease if they don't have certain minimums that they're supposed to have gotten. So that's the way mineral leases, oil and gas leases usually work. All right, so let's highlight that and make these notes, page 247. A variable lease, these are just provisions added to long-term leases. Ground lease is also a triple net lease, and highlight the first sentence. And an oil and gas lease, they're also known as mineral leases. And it's not just for oil or gas. Everybody got it? Look at that. Imagine constructing that World Trade Center, not even owning the land that the building's sitting on. Wow. All right. We have like two here, so let me take up 2 more minutes of your time so we could finish this chapter. What is the primary function of a property manager? When I just usually ask that question to people, they start, well, you got to collect the rents, you got to fill vacancies, you got to get rid of tenants that aren't paying the rent, you got to do repairs, property maintenance. All right, back up. You're too close. You're focusing on the little details. If you back up and look at the bigger picture, what is the primary function of a property manager? It is to maintain or increase the value of a property while generating income as an agent for the owner. Sure, it includes all of those details. But the larger picture, the grand scheme of things, you're maintaining or increasing the value of the property. Anybody ever see that property in Edison going into Highland Park? There's a huge shopping center on the right-hand side. A couple of years back, there was one building in that shopping center set way back in a huge parking lot. Then what they did is, you could see when the property management changed, they started tearing up the parking lot, repaved the lot. They pulled off the roofs, replaced the roof, changed the facade, put up signage, changed all the glass in the buildings. Then they started doing ground leases to tenants who would construct buildings in the parking lot, because they didn't need all that parking. That would then the tenants have long-term leases there. They constructed the buildings. If they ever move out, well, the buildings get left behind. Now the landlord has these buildings there that they could rent out. I drove by there recently, and God, it is massive right now. It's like they covered that entire area with buildings. Anybody know what I'm talking about? On St. George, I'm sorry, on Route 27 towards Highland Park, coming from Edison towards Highland Park on your right-hand side. What is the anchor store there? Oh, bothers me all the time. I always forget. Anyway, you could tell when the property management changed, because previously they had only like 2 or 3 stores in there that were open for business and active. And they weren't doing very good. They were always trying to rent out for a couple of years the other units, and they couldn't rent them out. And now when they changed the property management, they did all these repairs and suggestions to the landlord, which they did. And now they rented out all the units. They constructed these new buildings. And now that place is since it's always busy. They're making money over there now. All right. So you need to know what the primary function of a property manager is. So we're going to highlight that right here on page 248. And we're going to also pencil in the words "or increases," because you don't just preserve the property value, you could also increase it, just like they did at this one shopping center that I was just describing. For the life of me, I can't remember what the hell it's called right now, though. That anchor store is.
Yeah, but it takes money to make money, so.
Yeah, it sure does. Sure does. But, if you got a property manager that's just sitting there waiting for tenants to come, and the building's all busted up and broken down, you're not making suggestions to the landlord, hey, fix the leaky roof, or at least replace the windows so that you could see in them, because these things are so old, they're all scratched up and the glass is worn out. You can't even see inside the front window. Nobody wants to rent it. The parking lot's full of potholes. Or, you got a couple of bushes here, they look like they're dead. You got an old sign that looks like it's from the 1950s. Who's going to want to rent that and pay a top dollar? So I think all they had in there was like a massage parlor, a Chinese buffet, and an Indian bank. That was like the only buildings there. Oh, it was called the H Mart. H Mart. Anybody familiar with that? The H Mart shopping center there. Right now, if you drive by there, you get blinded by all the lights. They got like all these LED bright lights on all of these buildings. They put office buildings, they put additional malls, strip stores in there. It's it's a madhouse right now. Look it up on Google on Route 27, Highland Park, the H Mart. Okay, anyway, you got these highlights?
That's in Edison, right?
Yeah. For Edison Highland Park, it's right on the border there. Okay, so once again, property managers, they work as general agents, where most agents work as special agents, right? They still got to follow those fiduciary duties, but they got that they're allowed to legally bind their clients to contracts within the scope of their authority that was granted to them in the property management agreement. That property management agreement acts as their limited power of attorney. Those property management agreements are usually customized and individualized between the brokerage and the different property owners, depending on what the property owners want them to do in exchange for the fee that they're going to be earning. So that's how the property manager is usually considered a general agent, where most real estate brokers function as special agents.
Victor, by the way, should we tell you that we're over the clock now, or?
I already told you I was over the clock, that I just needed a minute to go over this so that we could get done with this chapter. This is pretty much the last thing right here for you to highlight. The rest of these pages here in the chapter go over property management in such a superficial manner that there's really not much redeeming qualities to get out of it, or anything that you're going to get from exam here. Except I would like to note that on page 250, the second paragraph, put a little asterisk next to it. It's pretty interesting. How do you know when you should raise the rents when you're not charging enough rent? It says, if there's a high level of vacancy that exists, an immediate effort should be made to determine why. A high level of vacancy does not necessarily indicate that rents are too high. The trouble may be inept management or defects in the property. The manager should attempt to identify and correct the problems first, rather than immediately lowering rents. Conversely, a high percentage of occupancy may appear to indicate an effective rental program, but it could also mean that the rental rates are too low. So you're renting quick. So with an apartment house or office building, anytime your occupancy level exceeds 95%, serious consideration should be given to raising the rents. That's why you see sometimes in strip malls and such, rental units may be vacant for years. Well, they write it off, I guess, on their taxes as a loss against the units that are fully occupied and rented. All right, so you guys got that? CPM is a course if you guys want to get involved in property management. It's called the Certified Property Manager. There's other ones out there as well. This one was created years ago by IREM, the Institute of Real Estate Management, in cooperation with BOMA, the Building Owners and Managers Association. It's a designation course you could take. I've had people that did take that before. They said it's a really good course, that were involved in property management. I don't know. I'm not in property management myself. And here's another one if you want to be involved in property management of condominium communities. CAI, it's the Community Association Institute. It's a good resource for those that want to be involved in those kinds of managements. So I got a bunch of resources and classes and designation courses here you could take. And this is pretty much going to conclude this chapter here, the Certified Property Manager, page 251. Yeah. We'll do the key terms to review, and then we're done. Okay. So there are two key terms to review. Let's do them. Landlord's responsibility for decent conditions. What do we call that? The landlord's responsibility for decent conditions, for providing decent conditions.
Implied warranty of habitability.
That is correct. The implied warranty of habitability, 9 is A. A transfer of property by lease.
Demise.
Demise. 4 is B. Situation where a tenant remains after a lease period has expired.
Holdover tenancy.
There are holdover tenancy. 8 is C. A contract between the landlord, the tenant, and tenant transferring the right to use the real property for a specific period of time in exchange for rent.
Lease.
Disagree.
Long explanation for a lease. Yes, correct. 10 is D. A lease for a definite period of time has a start date, has an end date.
Estate for years.
An estate for years, which need not be for years, right? 5 is E. Suit for possession, legal removal of a tenant.
Eviction.
That's referred to as actual eviction. 1 is F. Rental of land on which a tenant erects their own building.
Ground lease.
Yes, 7 is G. The tenant is also referred to as
The lessee.
the lessee. 11 is H. A lease under which the landlord pays taxes, insurance, and other expenses.
Gross lease.
6 is I, the gross lease, correct. Transfer of primary responsibility for a lease to another party.
Assignment.
2 is J, correct. Tenant is forced to move because the rental unit becomes uninhabitable.
Constructive eviction.
Constructive eviction, 3 is K. All right, let's go down to the next one. Next to letter B at the end of the line, write and not paying rent. Next to letter B at the end of the line, write and not paying rent.
I got it.
And next to letter D at the end of the line, write automatically renews. And then here we go. A lease in which a tenant pays expenses like property taxes, insurance, and so forth.
Net lease.
Yes, 3 is A. Tenants remaining after the lease term without the landlord's consent and they're not paying rent.
Tenancy at sufferance.
9 is B, tenancy at sufferance. A lease in which a landlord shares in the gross receipts of the tenant's business. What do you call that type of lease where the landlord shares the gross receipts of the tenant's business?
Is it percentage lease?
It would be a percentage lease. 4 is C. A lease with regular payments and no stated ending date that automatically renews.
Periodic lease.
Correct. From period to period, periodic lease. 5 is D. A person who looks after another person's real estate. What do we call them?
Property manager.
Yes, property manager. 6 is E. Tenancy that may be terminated when the landlord or tenant wishes.
Tenancy at
Tenancy at will.
At will, correct. 10 is F. Landlord's court action to evict a tenant.
suit for possession.
It would be. 8 is G. A transfer of only a portion of a lease. That's a weird way of writing it.
Sublease.
Yes, 7 is H. Property manager's employment agreement.
Management agreement.
Yeah. 2 is I. State requirement that tenants be notified of their rights.
Truth in renting.
11 is J, the truth in renting. Correct. And what do we call the landlord?
Lesser.
The lessor. 1 is K. And that concludes chapter 12. So look at that. We killed 2 big chapters today. That was good.